All right, good morning. I have 9 o'clock Verizon time. I don't know how accurate that is for the rotation of the Earth, but it's probably about time for us to get started. So welcome to the 9 o'clock time slot. I'd like to thank our sponsor, coffee. It's there for, all of you guys that are hoping that I don't just read boring PowerPoints to you. Coffee. All right. My name is Brett Morrill. I'm the Director of Enterprise Applications and Development. Apparently that was one letter too long for the badge length for my title. On it, it says I'm the Director of Enterprise Applications and Development. So just stop with the end. It'll be good. All right. I'm here today to talk a little bit about the data governance. Data governance. Obviously haven't had enough of our sponsor this morning. And its impact on my group, which is kind of the application development group at Wichita State. Let's see, there we go. I throw this slide in. I threw it in last year and have used it a few times. One of my managers loved it. And so every time I put it in a presentation, she owes me a beer. So I just kind of keep putting it in presentations. So far, hopefully I've given you a polite greeting, introduced who I am. The relevant link is we're all working in IT, and I think we're all struggling with some of the same stuff around application purchasing and also around, how do we control that and our data? So where are we going? This is our managing expectations. I'm going to talk a little bit about how this presentation came out of discussions that happened with last year's presentation. If you didn't see my presentation last year, don't worry about it. I'll give you a quick synopsis in about 30 seconds of what it was about. We're then going to talk about the data management committee that we have at Wichita State and its impact on what we're doing. Going to talk a little bit about the questionnaires that the DMC uses, and then talk about some of the challenges that we still have to that Wichita State. So last year's presentation was over enterprise application, untangling the spaghetti that we have. We were in the process of documenting what third-party applications do we have. My team came up with about 200 data file integrations going to about 100 different software systems. And so I hate to say this, I'm the youngest developer in that group, and I'm really a director, so I shouldn't be developing. I'm 55. The rest of them are going to start retiring in about 2 years. And so really what I tasked them with was, if I have an interface file name, I should be able to type it into a system and get everything that I want to know about it. What's the name of the program that generates it? How does it run? Where does it dump its data file? How is it transferred? Where is it transferred to? Likewise, if I'm looking and see a program name, I should be able to type that in there and get that same information. Trying to think ahead to, if we are actually allowed to hire some new people, they're not going to know all this knowledge we have in our head. So how do we get that to them? But the interesting thing is, I did the presentation at Czech, and then I did another conference called Cohesion, which is specifically a United States banner users group conference. And as we were talking about that, this common question came up, which was, how do you manage your end users from just going out and buying, and excuse the phrase, crap, and wanting to put our data in it? And it was like, wow. And we started having conversations about that. Here at Czech, you have 40 minutes. I think I filled 45 of those 40 minutes. At Cohesion, I had an hour. I think I filled probably about an hour and 10 minutes at the presentation talking about that. So there was definitely a need. So what does our data management committee look like at Wichita State? I know yesterday Gina kind of touched on it in her presentation, if you saw that. I know Mandy was talking about the beginning of it at Hutch. So this is what we have currently, and I'm going to be straight up honest with you. We have a 19-page document that details our data management committee and process. And my understanding is, if you guys would like a copy of that, you can email me, and I believe our chief data officer will be more than happy to send it to you. So, data management committee. Oh my God, I just violated one of the cardinal rules of presentations. I'm not going to read this to you. In essence, what this says is the data management committee is tasked with making sure that we know where our data is going. We're participating in best data practices. We're setting standards for how data is reported out. And we're basically taking care of any security around that. And so that's what they're tasked with. The little footnote basically says it applies to all of our data systems, not just a few, all of them. So that's the quick bullet points on what that says. Our structure looks like this. We have data trustees at the top, data owners, data stewards, and data custodians. It's very possible that one person serves at multiple levels and capacities at our university in those levels. So what is a data trustee? Data trustee is basically your president, your chancellor, the vice presidents, those that have the fiduciary responsibility for making sure that the university runs and are responsible for all of its assets. That's the highest level. Now, they really haven't ever been involved in mitigating any disputes or anything, but they do have that authority. If there is a roadblock at the lower levels, it goes to them, they'll make the final decision, we're done. But like I say, I can't remember any time when we've been going through our process where we've had anything go to that level. It usually is taken care of within the lower levels. The next highest area is the data owners. These guys own kind of the broad swaths of data, if you want to think about it. Student data, finance data, HR pay data. And I think the reason I put there's data stewards in there is making a point under student data is a good example. Student data is just kind of a wide, broad definition, right? Encompasses a lot of stuff. Our registrar is the data owner for student data, but she doesn't know financial aid, admissions, those areas. But she is very particular about who gets access to student data. And so anytime we have to give out access from our core student information system, our imaging system, any of the other systems, she wants to have approval to that. In fact, we were having conversations last week about the fact that she needed to know who all had access to what data that was stored in our imaging system, and could she actually search all of it if general counsel's office asked her for all data pertaining to a particular student. Data owner. That's what she's doing. She's taking that, seriously. As we said, data stewards. These are the people that kind of understand the general business practice that's happening in that area. So like our financial aid director, she understands the processes that are going on within her area and, has to be able to come and talk about this is what we're doing with our data. Likewise, our human resources people, likewise, our payroll is a separate department. Our payroll person understands how payroll works, kind of understands how HR interfaces with it, but doesn't really understand all of the HR business processes. These guys are key in that they are responsible for how things run within their department. If they decide, I have this great idea on how I'm going to redo a process, and they just haul off and do it, something that you do over here in financial aid could potentially impact something happening in finance, could potentially impact something happening in HR for work study. It's just one of those situations where you can't just make a change because you woke up on a Tuesday and had a bright idea. You need to bring it to the data management committee so that everybody can say, wait a minute, if you do that, we're not going to be able to produce these reports. We're not going to have this data flowing into this other system. Everybody has to agree and know about it. Helps bring some visibility into those areas. And then you get down to the data custodians. These are the people that really work with the data on a day-to-day basis. Usually they're managers, supervisors of those that work with and understand those systems, basically almost on a table and field level, so that they can provide that information. What that looks like graphically is this, with all those layers. Now, as I said, you might have multiple people serving in multiple areas. So your data owner for student is also the same data custodian that's for the registrar's office, for the registrar student data for currently enrolled students. But the student area can be broken out into admissions, our international education group, housing people, financial aid, all of those on a more granular level. You have compliance officers. Gina spoke on that a little bit yesterday. We have our chief data officer, our CIO, our chief information security officer, our chief privacy officer. We have an associate vice president that's in charge of our higher learning commission and enrollment management area that's on there. We have a representative from our general counsel's office. All of those guys, the data owners, data stewards, and the compliance officers really are the voting members. Now you'll notice off to the side, you have support. You have ITS. So I serve on it. Jason serves on it. I think we're about the only two from our group that are on it, but we are there to vet out, okay, does this fit into our architecture? Does it make sense from a single sign-on? Does it make sense that they're trying to have data interfaced into it in a way that fits with the strategies that we set, the technology stacks that we have, and all of that? But we are just advisory. The actual voting member is our chief information officer, our boss. You also have, it's called OPA, Office of Planning and Analysis. It really used to be the Institutional Research Office. So that's why I put the IR on there. So that makes up the group. This group, we have standing meetings twice a month. It's usually the first Thursday and the third Thursday. We always meet, unless there's really a bizarre situation, the first meeting of the month. The second one is in case we need to have something comes up and we need to deal with it before we get to the next full month. Besides just approving software purchases, since we didn't have any last time we had a meeting, we started back in on the, okay, we are documenting each of our data columns. We're documenting our data definitions. I don't know how many definitions of freshmen you guys have at your colleges. We have like 15. So are you talking traditional freshmen, first-time people at the university, non-traditional freshmen? Yeah. When somebody says, give me a list of freshmen, the first words out of our chief data officer's mouth are, what do you mean by freshmen? And it just blows people's minds. They're like, well, I mean freshmen. And then he starts through his litany list. And by the time they're done, they're like, why did I even ask? So, all right, the tool that we use. We have questionnaires. These get really interesting. We have an internal questionnaire. These are just some of the questions that are on it, just to give you an idea. We're basically trying to say, why do you want to purchase this piece of software? What business problem are you trying to solve? Is there something that we currently have that maybe we could use instead of spending some more money? What type of data do they want? How do they retain the data? What happens when we're done with this company? How do we get the data back? What is really interesting is, I think usually the questionnaires come back. So I've got this very specific problem. This vendor will absolutely solve this problem. No, we do not have anything else on campus that will help do what this piece of software will do. Even though it'll get us 99.5% of the way there, it's that 1.5% that's the differentiator, man. I need this software. The data, we had somebody here recently. They presented a document that was a Word document that just had like first name, last name, GPA typed out on it. And I was like, okay, I've worked in applications long enough. This isn't a file spec. It's like, is this really from the vendor? Because if it is from the vendor, obviously they aren't mature enough to actually understand how to put a file spec together. If it isn't from the vendor, you need to give me one from the vendor. Well, it was our internal user who typed up a wish list of data fields that he wanted to put into the software. It's like, no, no, go back and get me a list of that. What's even more entertaining is when the user cannot or doesn't want to fill this out, so they send it to the vendor to fill out the internal questionnaire. It's pretty apparent when that happens too. So we have an external questionnaire. Obviously, we're getting the vendor name. We're trying to figure out what their platform is like. We want to know, what type of SSO do they use? What type of data they're going to host, how they're going to secure it. We ask for their VPAT so that we know it's accessible. We also ask for any external third-party analysis of their security and statements of that. We need to know, are you going to host any of our data outside of the US? Because that's definitely a no-go for the state of Kansas. Just a lot of questions and try and fetter that out. However, my favorite question is provide us your address for your corporate headquarters. Now, these are not pictures of actual corporate headquarters of any software that we use. But it's always entertaining when we're in a DMC meeting and our chief information security officer is doing a Google Street View and he's sending me a picture of the corporate headquarter address, and it looks something like the crack house that I Googled. I mean, it's very telling. There are some people, it's like, they scrape together enough money to buy an AWS instance, to spin it up, and to be able to, write their software, deploy it, put it out there, and hope to God I can sell it to enough people so that I can pay next month's rent on AWS. So, while that is a picture that I got when I put in crack house, it is not too far off of some of the Google Street Views that we've seen. Obviously, you see something like that, it throws a red flag. Now, we pull all this information together. What impact does this have on applications? First off, as Gina so eloquently reminded me in her presentation yesterday, we are an advisory board. We advise on risk. So in other words, we can say, yeah, this seems like a pretty solid company. It looks like their funding is, pretty well in place. They've got a good business model. Their architecture is good. We can interface data to them. The committee has decided what data that we will send them. Most of the time, it is just enough data to run the software. In other words, what is required. Sometimes maybe a little bit of extra data that they'll take. Most of the time, no. You can give us a list of 40 fields. If you only need 5 of them, we're probably only going to give you 5 data fields to make the software run. If on the other hand, we're Google mapping, they've run through all of their angel financing, they have a crack house as their headquarters or an apartment complex or something like that, we're going to come back and say, you know what, the risk is very high. The story I often like to tell was one that our CISO told me. He was working in private industry at the time. They basically did a Google map of somebody who was trying to sell them a product. Their corporate headquarters was a 2nd-story apartment building. Their servers were under a desk, and they were right next door to a shady strip bar. Yeah, that was a no-go. So these things happen. We advise that risk. Now, what are the challenges? So the DMC has come back and said, hey, we think there's low risk. This is probably okay. We're going to let general counsel know. General counsel then goes ahead and starts to, do what they need to do, put all the fun stuff into the contract to help protect our interests at WSU and get the thing signed. We've had 3 people come up through DMC. They're all approved. They're all going to general counsel. That means we can buy the software, right? And as soon as we sign the contract, IT is going to be ready to implement that, right? So there's still kind of that disconnect from DMC has approved it to we need an intake process into ITS's project management system so that we can get that flowing in and be able to actually schedule some resources to work on it. Because there's nothing finer than sitting around saying, well, you guys approved it in DMC. We signed the contract. We're scheduling those kickoff meetings with you next week, and there's like 4 of them. And I have 4 developers that work in this area. One of them is now out on medical leave, so that leaves 3 and then me to try and squeeze some time to make these things work. So we still need to get that kind of ironed out. Gina's still shaking her head at what I told her the other day. We actually went through a DMC review process on some software that our academic affairs people wanted to purchase. It is supposed to be the greatest stuff since sliced bread for what it's trying to target with. They were out of their first round of angel funding. The president is also the marketing guy, who's also the sales guy, who's on all the implementation calls, modifying the software while we're implementing it. We came back and said there's pretty high risk with this. Probably shouldn't purchase it. But, here's all of the issues we have with it. And the associate vice president said, besides all those risks, is there any reason I can't buy this? And went ahead and purchased it anywhere. So that brings up an interesting point. You're all sitting here going, okay, we guys got this great process, but they still ran off and bought it, right? And the way I kind of described that, because I went into my boss's office and I said, are we heading for a train wreck? And he said, you know what this institution needs? Is a good train wreck. But here's what the DMC did for us. Number one, IT didn't say no. We are not the no organization, right? We have this other group of people that are responsible and tasked with being responsible for the security of our data. We have people that are responsible for reviewing these things. They advised on risk. We've documented. You wanted to buy X product. Here's the internal, here's the external reviews of these. Here's the minutes from our meeting where we advised that there was risk. You still went off and bought it. If something happens, we've got it documented that you actually made a bad decision, but we didn't tell you no. Likewise, it frees my people up when we get to these data interfaces and it's like, all right, here's these 40 fields. Besides first name, last name, email, address, ID, so we can look at the SSO, we'd like gender, race, GPA, academic standing. No, those weren't approved. First name, last name, email, address, ID, maybe one other key data bit, and that was it. That's what these people said. Just last week, I had an individual from an interface that we had done back in December say, you know, it'd be really nice if you could send these other 5 data bits in. Do you think that you could, you know what, if you want those, go back through the DMC? Because they approve these. I can't give them to you. I'd love to help you. I'd love to help you. But I can't give those because the DMC didn't authorize that. But if they say yes, I'll be more than happy to put those into the interface for you. See how that changes the narrative? IT is no longer the no organization. It takes us out from having to make that decision. The people that have responsibility are saying yes or no to that decision. And most times they're not going to go back and, try and lock horns with the registrar, the chief data officer, the head of financial aid, the head of HR, the head of payroll, those groups. They're just going to take a deep breath and go, okay. Now, if you need data tied back to those dimensions of data that are not in your system, we need to be able to pull data out of that system that you have, put it into a data warehouse where we have these other bits, and then let our Office of Planning and Analysis merge all that and spit out a report for you. So we have a way of taking care of your need. It's just not we're shoving all of this into your software system. So, like I say, it's interesting. We have some challenges still. I'm still waiting for that first train wreck to hit. I know we're a little ahead of schedule, but after sitting around listening to Mandy's presentation and Gina's presentation and seeing the questions that have come up, last night after I got done drinking and was sitting in my hotel room going through this, I thought, you know what, let's just leave a little extra time because I think there is some need and I know you guys will probably have some questions. There's my contact information. Like I said, we have a 19-page document that goes into a lot of detail about how this DMC is organized, what its purpose and focus is. It even has its charter document that was signed off by the university. So what questions do you guys have?
How long did it take you to get this going?
That's a great question. So our chief data officer is a guy by the name of Dr. David Wright. He has a PhD in statistical sociology. He's been at the university 35 years. He has risen up through the ranks. He and our current president were both associate vice presidents at the same time, so they have a really good relationship. I would say we have probably been doing this for 4 or 5 years. So it has taken some time. Really, the committee as it is now with the questionnaire is developed over time too. We at least had a few questions, and then as we went along and were doing the process, we discovered we needed to add more to them. I would say that's probably really evolved over about the past 2.5 years. So what we're doing now, like I say, has evolved and has probably been kind of in the state it is for about 2 years or so. Now, David is a very charismatic guy. He's a political mover. He knows how to build consensus among groups. He also knows how to cut your legs out from under you because he has the right political connections, right? And so, is that a fair assessment? Yeah, which works to our benefit, And so I kind of feel for you guys that don't have somebody like that. It may be a little tougher, but once again, don't be the no people. Build that consensus. Get them together. And then that way you kind of take IT out of that role. Did that answer your question? Okay. What else you guys got for me? Yes.
So decommissioning software, you go through the same process.
Generally stuff just dies on the vine. We need to get there, to be brutally honest with you. Sometimes the first inkling that we have that something may not be running is we start getting failure notifications on interface transfers. And then we discover somebody didn't pay the bill because they were done with it. At which point we have to shut it off and, decommission everything. That's probably the next step. What else?
You do the same process for the software upgrade or framework changes.
So we are starting through, and primarily we do this with cloud-based software, but every so often you have, renewals that you have to do. What they're looking at is every time you would have to do a renewal, say you have a 3-year contract, 3 years are up, you're signing your next renewal, it would have to go through this process again because things change, vendors change. Right now I'm dealing with a couple of systems, even though they're on-prem, are very aged, they're not being invested in. It's time to look at other software. So we need to kind of do that review. That's kind of the idea. I think we've had 1 or 2 come through on a renewal basis to kind of look at that and re-up them. Yes.
So you have potentially internal developers at different departments within WSU. How do you set the standard for development and secure programming practices?
So we are, with the exception of maybe just a couple of areas, very centralized in development. Now, that doesn't mean that this grad school student invented something that was like the coolest thing ever. We had one of those come up. The student was leaving. They're like, hey, you know what? This is great. We're an innovation campus. You do a Google search, you're going to find like 5 apps to do the same damn thing, right? But here we are. This is the coolest thing. We need to buy it and sell it. The minute we're made aware of it, right through this process and kind of evaluate it. We also have had the situation recently where something came through DMC. The infamous quote that we all love, you don't need IT to run this. So one of our colleges bought some software that was designed for mentoring. And their idea is the freshman coming in, the infamous freshman coming in, would be matched with somebody from that college that was kind of an upperclassman to kind of help them along, focused on retention. So they pulled out the P card, bought it, so it didn't have to go through the contract process, which is another thing I should mention. General counsel and our purchasing offices are on board. They are kind of first step stopgaps. If a contract comes through, GC sends out to Gina's boss, our chief information security officer, sends out to our chief data officer, sends out to Ken. Hey, do you guys know about this contract? And if the answer is no, they're like, we're going to sit on it, get a hold of them, send them through this. Same thing with purchasing. They will block it, but.
So that's kind of the same thing that we're trying to do.
Okay. Yeah.
But what I bring up is that we do have lots of different schools and departments. Each of them will come up with, we want to develop, or we want to start up a WordPress blog or something like that.
Right.
So if you had a project maybe based off of open source software that you custom develop, they potentially, if they wanted to get campus data sources, they go through that process. But how would you regulate the requirements of security processes to put that product out there on the WSU network?
I think it would actually go through some of the same process because, like I say, we do ask our cloud vendors, have you gone through external audits? Have you, and I forget what the name of, and Gina's looking at her phone, what the name of the process is. Mark is always asking, do you have a blah, blah, whatever? Kind of like a certification. Yeah. Anyway, yeah. There are official audits that people pass. So I would say we would treat the developers out there in the community kind of the same way. Do you have that? Just real quick, back to the story about you don't need IT. They ran a report out of our reporting system, pulled all their students, shoved them into this product, did their trial, and then decided they wanted to sign a contract. So it came up on our radar. And then that's when we started asking them. So by freshman, you have a individual who has finally decided to come to college, saved up their money. They're 35 years old, and you're going to partner that person with a 21-year-old? And they're like, oh, we hadn't thought about that. That's where the people that understand the data can really start figuring out what is it you're trying to do. The other thing is, if, and I hate to say this, if for some reason somebody does that type of thing and goes and runs around this process and that company gets breached and our data is in that, and we don't know that it was approved for the data to go there, I don't know if we're quite at that point yet, but that would be good grounds for termination. Because you took a university asset, exposed the university to liability without going through an approval process that is already backed by executives, that is understood, and is something you have to do. Yes.
Brett, he's the tech map, the higher education vendor assessment tool is what the.
Right. I don't think we're using that exactly. It's kind of more of an internal homegrown questions. I think if you actually had filled out the HECVAC, we would consider that, but I think you're still going to have to answer our internal and external questionnaires. Yeah.
We're kind of doing the same thing, but with the procurement side, we kind of make that part of the procurement process, like, does this vendor have a HECVAC?
Oh, cool.
I think it's like what you're saying, it's another plot, like, help you assess what's.
Yes. Right. It's usually a red flag when we say, hey, what are your security setups? Have you had this external security review and have this certification? Well, we're on AWS. So Amazon's certified. So therefore we are. Yeah, not exactly. Sorry. Yes.
Do you have a similar process? It's slightly off topic, but for accessibility evaluation with applications as well?
Yes, we actually our media resource center, and I don't know all of the details, but we have an agreement with some organization that we have to hit some certain level. So this process, one of the things we require is a VPAT, right? Anything else that we're using, usually the media resource center is where that's out of. They have kind of the accessibility technology area. They're looking at a lot of that too. This was an example. They have grappled with these book vendors that come along and say, hey, if you guys buy our textbooks, you also can use our portal to provide blah, 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 instead of using Blackboard. And there are a couple of vendors that have been blacklisted because their portal is not ADA compliant, does not meet the level that we need to. And the instructors, faculty are basically told, you will not do this. So, and it comes from the provost. So did that answer the question kind of?
Yes.
Yeah. Yeah, we take that very seriously because we don't want to violate our agreement. What else? Yeah.
So we kind of give you the background and I'll get to the question. So there was about a year and a half before I came to the college where there was no IT leadership, like the old CIO had brain cancer.
Yeah.
It was a great exit, right? And so it turned into the Wild Wild West.
Yes.
And the financial aid team went and bought software, the Cadillac, right?
Right.
And then the admissions team went and bought Slate.
Yes. Uh-huh.
So we're managing through issues with, well, in financial aid as region, we're managing through some issues around both of them, right?
Mhm.
How would you take those software platforms that are already in place and reevaluate them using the DMC? Because I'm real concerned about all the information they want to collect in Slate.
Right.
Like they want everything. They
Yeah.
want you right on.
Yes.
And you first born, right?
Uh-huh.
And I'm really concerned about the amount of data they're collecting and what they think they're gonna do with it.
Yeah.
So how do we go back through this and like reevaluate our software every now and then?
What I would say is because we use Slate too, and it just so happens that our 5-year contract is up. So I reached out to them. Slate, I've heard that they never ever raised the price on anybody. They basically came back and said the number of applications we're running is the same. So at this point, we're going to have to send it back through this process because it's a cloud vendor. It's, we just need to review it. So I would say it's reasonable to say, look, I know you guys bought this at X point in time when the contract's up. We've got this new process in place. We just want to do this risk analysis. And then we can move forward from there. You know, you may not want to come back and try and hit them all at once, you know what I mean? But the contract renewal is a great time to be able to say that's a divider, because if you have to separate with them, you can give them whatever notification is in the contract, 30 days, 60 days, whatever, that we're not going to buy them. So do it enough ahead of that. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, I don't want to be public enemy number one.
Right. Yeah.
But I also don't want it to be a free for all.
Right. Yes. Yeah. And, you know, I think it's become very apparent on our campus because about little over a year ago, we had an attempt and we were able to get it stopped. But I think that woke a lot of people up. Our president has always been very touchy about ransomware, you know, cyber attack, those type of things, which helped funding that helped us put us in a position that we were able to stop what was happening back a year ago, April. But that just reinforced, even with everything we have, they're still trying. So if the possibility of millions of dollars of payout and the headache with attorneys and everything, you know, doesn't scare you, it should. And the best way is to go through a process like this and make sure we're not giving any and all data to any vendor that hasn't been vetted. I think we have just about filled our time. We have like 4 minutes if you have another question. If not, I'll let you run and get more coffee. All right. Thank you for spending your morning with me.